I am Gary Kaiser, representing Strategic Resources Incorporated and the Master Resilience Training Support Center team. Strategic Resources Incorporated is proud to serve as a sponsor for today's event. SRI was founded in 1988 and is focused on management consulting, engineering and logistics, telecommunications, information technology, and healthcare services. And our motto is, caring for those who protect and defend our nation. We are proud to partner with the Directorate of Prevention, Resilience, and Readiness to support the Army's Resilience and Performance Enhancement Program, which is designed to increase the physical and psychological health, resilience, and performance of soldiers, families, and Department of Defense civilians. The MRT-TCS program equips soldiers with the mental skills necessary to enhance performance and resilience, leading to increased readiness and lethality. In 2024 alone, we trained nearly 800,000 personnel and frequently partnered with local chaplains to collaboratively address installation community, holistic health, and resilience needs. We look forward to continuing and improving on that performance and partnership in the future. Today's panel, Building Resilient Army Family and Community, is designed to address how the Army can structure installations to facilitate community building efforts so that the Army family is prepared for large-scale combat. Our moderator this afternoon is Command Sergeant Major James Edward Morris, Jr. of the 589th Brigade Support Battalion. Command Sergeant Major Morris was born in Jackson, Mississippi, and entered the Army on 19 August 1997. He attended basic combat training and religious affairs specialist, formerly known as chaplain assistant, advanced individual training course at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. He is currently serving as the Command Sergeant Major of the 589th Brigade Support Battalion, 41st Field Artillery Brigade, Grafenwehr, Germany, and has served 2 tours in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom and 1 tour in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. He is a graduate of the Sergeants Major Academy and has a Master's of Science degree in Organizational Leadership from Excelsior College. His training and education received through the Army is extensive and includes, among others, the Emergency Medical Ministry course and the Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Train the Trainer course. Command Sergeant Major Morris and his wife Pamela have 3 adult children, Selena, Jasmine, and James III. Please join me in welcoming Command Sergeant Major Morris to the stage. The floor is yours, Sergeant Major.
Thank you so much, sir. I will tell you this, it's definitely a pleasure to be here with you all today. And definitely good afternoon to each and every one of you. Hopefully the lunch did not cause you to fall asleep. And then as a Command Sergeant Major, I will stand everyone up and do some overhead hand claps. So we will move forward as we go into our discussion today. Our third panel for today will discuss building a resilient Army family and community. Our discussion comes with a backdrop that involves the need to synergize a post-COVID pandemic Army community while inculcating resiliency in the 21st century post-war Army family and hardening the Army family and community in preparation for destabilizing events such as large-scale combat operations. The strength of our nation is our Army. The strength of our Army is our soldier, and the strength of our soldier is our families. So eloquently spoken by General Raymond Ordinero, and he provides a clear connection to our Army's family's resilience as a key component to the success of our profession and strength in our national resolve. Field Manual 7-22, Health and Holistic Fitness, prescribes that the Army family serves as a key contributor to the surroundings where the soldier goes to heal and prevent illness. A surrounding, an environment, impacts the way soldiers feel as well as their health outcomes. The Army family is key to our soldiers' national resolve to fight and win our nation's wars. Within the last 2.5 decades, the Army family has undergone a series of challenges and generational changes, causing high stress-induced environments inside the home as well as within the greater Army community. As a result, Army families have become ever increasingly isolated, less attached within the unit and greater community, and wearied by the outcomes of war, or for that much, rumors of wars, fiscal instability, and COVID pandemic. Soldiers and their dependents find it hard to remain resilient, to preserve, adapt, and grow in dynamic and/or stressful environments. Leading change denotes whenever human communities are forced to adjust to shifting conditions, pain is ever present, as written by John Cotter in his book, Leading Change. However, there remains the ability to foster resilience by leveraging Army programs, religious support activities, creative ideas to build cohesive communal groups within the greater community. And so today we will get the opportunity to discuss building a resilient Army family and community. Today we'll allow the panelists to take an opportunity to introduce themselves to you, the audience. Sir.
Okay. So thanks so much. Already off to a great start, and what a great example of the backbone of the Army, the strength of our Army, the non-commissioned officer, without a doubt, makes us unlike anyone else in the world, and we should never ever lose that. So thank you so much for leading the panel today. Delighted to be on the panel with so many great professionals who understand what it means to create a resilient community and a resilient family, resilient soldiers as well. I bring you the perspective as a Army retiree and soldier for life, but even with 4+ decades of that time in service, my longer experience is being a member of the Army family. So I joined the Army family in 1958. Sergeant Major and I were just chatting, and he said he's going to go celebrate his mother's birthday here in a couple days. She's 70 years old. I'm sitting beside a highly experienced Sergeant Major, and his mother's my age. This is terrible. This is terrible. I'm trying to be resilient myself right now. But that joining the Army family so long ago, back in 1958, and seeing the journey that the Army has been on ever since, it's really remarkable, and we should never sell ourselves short on the amount of progress that has been made on first even acknowledging the importance of Army families, much less making them resilient. That is not to be taken for granted, because that was not always the case. Certainly in my youth, the experience was you'd kind of tough it out. There wasn't much in the way of structure or support. Most people in the Army were not married. Certainly our enlisted force was mostly not married. And only a small portion of the non-commissioned officers and officers were married, and they formed a tight community. I learned about the nature of community in the Army. And more of our society could benefit from the nature of community that is created within the United States Army. The ability to take care of one another, or have birthday parties and celebrate great events in life together, to celebrate hardships together, because there are certainly hardships. There always have been, and there always will be, with or without large-scale operations around the world. Even without those, just the challenge of living a life of service can be devastating at times, especially when something bad happens. And sadly, bad things do happen. People get sick, children get lost, parents pass, things happen while you're deployed or in separate conditions. You're apart from one another for key and special events. Accidents happen in training. People are killed in combat. People take their own lives. There are things that happen in the community, and as much that calls for being resilient, being able to bounce back. To me, that's the simplest description of resilience. The fact that you can take a licking and keep on ticking. Some of you old timers know that's a Timex commercial, so I have to give you credit to that. But the ability to bounce back, to not be crushed by pressures, to not be distorted out of shape by impacts, is really what this is all about. And that absolutely applies to our families and our communities. And just a couple more thoughts I'd share as we're just kicking off here. The perspective I bring as a commander was always about trying to advance the art on making our units, our soldiers, our communities, our families more resilient. And sometimes it was more about harnessing the capabilities that were out there. So many great capabilities have grown through the years, but for a long time they were diffuse. So if you had them, then this capability is over on that side of post, and that one's over on that side of post, and this one's off post. That one's inside of a unit. This one is broadly applied so that no matter what unit you're in, you have access to it. And it was inefficient. We weren't getting power out of that approach to building a resilient soldier, a resilient family, a resilient community. Harnessing it came through concepts like we've now emerged into with a holistic health and fitness, but prior to that, comprehensive soldier fitness, all sorts of things. I think back to General Bob Brown doing such a great job of leading the association of the U.S. Army, and his experiences once upon a time, shortly after being commissioned at the Center for Enhanced Performance at West Point, that was creating an idea of how you could focus an individual to be more effective in whatever their role and responsibility is, but that worked from the inside out. It wasn't the same as just lifting weights. The same applies to our communities and to our families. How do you condition them to be able to bounce back when change occurs? How do you help them connect to one another with programs, with systems, with care, with just love that happens inside of the military family, extraordinary love? How do you do that over time and in a way that's consistent so that when they go from Camp Swampy USA to Camp Dusty USA or overseas, that they feel a connection from one to the next, that while their location has changed, the community that they're in has not changed, and that's what they're moving within. That the Army as a totality is a community. And moving from one node to another, which can be shocking, as many of us have a long list of places where we lived in our lives, and will be so for generations to come, that changing can be disruptive unless you feel like, I'm still in family, I'm still connected, I'm still valued. I didn't have much introducing to do before someone immediately accepted me and incorporated me into what was going on. So those are just some introductory thoughts. Honored to be with you, Vince Brooks, U.S. Army retired. Thanks.
Well, sir, that's going to be a little difficult to follow. So I will, per our conversation, yes, so Friday is my mother's birthday, so I am taking a trip to go see my mother. She doesn't know this, it's a surprise, so I hope it doesn't get to her in the next 2 days. But to that point, Reuben Murillo, the Director of the Provincial Resilience and Readiness, Senior Enlisted Advisor to Ms. Dee Geis in the G9 on the Army staff. And I will tell you, this portfolio, as massive and as huge as it is very, very rewarding. And why is because of the soldiers, families, and Army civilians that we fight for on a daily basis. And that's important. That's been my passion my entire 28 plus years in the Army, which is nothing compared to you, sir. It's again, just very, very baby. But it's a passion of mine, and it has been, and I will continue to serve until I get escorted to the front gate somewhere and they say, no, sir, you cannot come back. And the reason I say this, I bring this up in terms of my mom's birthday because a while back, and I talked to General Smith about this earlier, when I was attending the battalion pre-command course, his message to the team, to the class was about family. And it was truly, truly an honor to know that our senior leaders at the levels were understood and really, truly cared about family. And that was important to me because there are going to be significant emotional events that happen in your life when it comes to family. 3 months later, my sister passed away from cancer. 3 years later, my father passed away from cancer. And these are some of the things that happen within our lives that you have to build resiliency within yourself. So, bear with me, I promise this is going somewhere. Raise your hand if you have ever been punched in the face before. That's a significant emotional event, right? The very first time it happens. The very first time it happens, all right, it is a significant emotional event, right? So you sit there and you think about that. What's going to happen the next time? What did you do to get punched in the face, right? And how are you going to react to the punch in the face? And that's life, right? Life is going to punch you in the face, no matter what you do. And that's where your resiliency comes in. That's where you, as a person, as an individual, learn to develop resiliency within yourself. You get boxers, you get fighters, you get people that are out there, they start to learn certain things, right? Do I dodge? Do I level change? Do I jab? What do I do? I have to try to calculate my movements. Well, that's exactly what you do as an individual when you're calculating your movements through your life and building resiliency in yourself. And that's why it's so important that you understand that the community between resilience and the connection between resilience and family is what allows our soldiers to perform their warfighting mission, all right, for ready combat formations. And that's exactly what we do, and that's our job every single day. That's what we wake up for, that's what we go to work for, that's what we put forth the effort for, and that's what our families are the support system behind us. So thank you very much. I'm really, really looking forward to this, and thank you for AUSA for the invitation and for bringing this on, so thank you.
So following that, as a clinician, I both have concerns on how many people raise their hand for getting punched in the face. But I will say I have not been punched in the face, but I have punched someone else in the face. And you know, I was thinking as you were talking, my name is Corie Weathers, by the way. I was thinking about while you were talking, you know, I was a kid, I was getting teased on the bus, and I had a parent that said, well, punch him in the face. But you know, I mean, there's a lot of like, that's a whole other panel, right? However, if we're gonna be talking about resilience here, what was really happening in that moment? What was happening in that moment for me was that I felt like I wasn't doing well. I felt powerless. I felt that I needed help. And I had exhausted all of my resources by that point. And I had a leader in my life that saw that and said, you still have agency, you can do something about this, and you can stand up for yourself. And I think that's part of resiliency, is seeing as a leader who is in front of you and what is it that they're struggling with that makes their resiliency a factor. We could talk all day long about what resiliency is, how we define it, what programs, and all of those components and variables are very important. But I think what I hope to bring to the conversation, which has definitely come up throughout the day, this has been a phenomenal day, is the human side. The human side of relationships, the human side of seeing the person in front of you. What does it mean to lead in today's climate? I am a licensed professional counselor by trade. I'm a TRICARE clinician. That is, you know, kind of gray right now in the Tri-West, you know, TRICARE debacle that's happening right now. So I'm not today a TRICARE clinician, but that kind of goes to resources and programming and what our force is currently facing when some of those resources are kind of fumbling or falling apart or feeling like are creating more issues and stressors. So I am a mental health clinician by trade, but I'm also a military spouse. At one point I had 5 licenses in 5 different states and figured I've got to figure out another way to do this. It wasn't fair to me and it wasn't fair to the clients that I was working with. By the way, 20 years of my career has been devoted to the mental health needs of our force and this tribe that we love so much, and some first responders as well. So what I decided to do was take a step back and actually use those clinical skills to really examine from a psychological perspective the total force. How do you take those clinical things that you see and hear behind confidential doors and study the trends and the issues that we're seeing across all branches? How is our force doing? How is our morale? What's affecting our morale? What's the variables that are affecting the morale? How do we make changes on an individual leadership level or on an institutional level? So today I'm an author. I wrote a book called Military Culture Shift. It's got a long tagline, but it's the impact of war, money, and generational perspective on morale, retention, and leadership. I try to get all that in there. But it really is about 15 years worth of research of everything that I heard behind confidential doors, and realizing that it was a theme everywhere that I went. Issues such as a lot of repression and resentment in our spouse and family community, a lot of anxiety that was really affecting marriages in our service member population as they were going up through the ranks, seeing marriages break down, and seeing the compounding stress of 2 decades of conflict and how all of these variables combined have affected our total force. So I hope to, I guess, bring to the table today a perspective of just a total force perspective of some of the biggest changes that we're seeing today, the trends that we're seeing, and even the trends that we're seeing in the last month and the morale that's happening there, and how we can encourage our force to be more resilient. I'm going to also, just last thing to say, I'm going to encourage that in your team meetings, at your tables, in regulation and doctrine, as you continue to use that word resilient, that it is a taboo word out in the military family space. We don't like the word resilient. We can talk about that more if you like to. So.
Well, there goes my introduction. It was going to be about resiliency and families, but I will come up with something else. My name is Elan Babchuck. I'm actually going to start where originally when I was jotting down notes where I was going to finish, but the most important thing to know about me is that I'm a husband and a father of 3, 5, 9, and 12, and they're with me everywhere I go. And they are the source of my strength. And they are, they have seen me through some of the most traumatic, complicated, painful experiences in my life. And, I do think of this concept of this taboo word, resiliency. I think of it like a Tempur-Pedic mattress. Right? You ever like sort of put your hand down on a Tempur-Pedic, and it sort of, then your handprint kind of sticks around for a minute, and you're like, oh, that's what my hand was sort of looking. And then what happens? It sort of regains shape, and it, what the family unit does, it's the reason why it's the building block of community and of society, is that these are the folks who were there when you were whole. These are the folks who can remind you what shape you were in before this thing happened and can lift you back up to regain that shape of who you once were, right? And that's what they've done for me many, many times. Professionally, I lead a think tank. We focus on the intersection of macro societal trends that are taking place in the public square and on the future of faith and communities of meaning in America. What that means is I've authored a couple of books on meaning making, another one on leadership, and working on 2 others on a research-backed approach to building belonging inside of communities, and another one on how technology impacts the mental health of young people. In my volunteer life, I'm the founding partner of an organization called Starts With Us, which is aiming to address the growth of toxic polarization in the country, and taking a ground up approach to doing that. And I think most pertinently to this, I'm one of the founding research advisory board members of a research institute called Springtide Research Institute that focuses on mental health, spirituality, and our youngest generations. Through that, and also through my think tank, I've led some research efforts. One on the landscape of American religion and how it's been shifting over the last 20 some odd years, another on expressions of spirituality and faith in the workplace, and a third on how young people, specifically Gen Z, are expressing their religiosity, spirituality, and faith, or not, in their own lives. What I'll say is just one note to close. For the last 30 some odd years, there's been a pretty kind of a very commonly accepted narrative of erosion in communities, right? Robert Putnam wrote about the disappearance of bowling leagues and other intermediary institutions where we used to gather, and also the erosion of family units in America. And he used all these statistics. He wrote a book, Bowling Alone, followed up with American Grace, which talked about the decline of institutional religion in America. And I just want to offer one point, which is that a week ago, The Pew Center just released their latest study of the landscape of American religion. They do it every single year. It's the first time in 30 years that all Americans, on average, are now more likely to participate in faith and spiritual communities. They're more likely to attend worship services. They're more likely to believe in God or a higher power. And they are more likely to take those experiences of belonging and belief into their everyday lives through spiritual practice. And that includes our youngest generations. So I think we're in a moment of a unique opportunity, generational opportunity as it pertains to looking at this intersection of mental health of young people and of how it intersects with spiritual practice.
So I believe that you've already given us the answer to the question, and so I think we're going to close now. I think that leads us into our questions as we'll continue on here. So how can the Army structure installations to facilitate community building efforts to harden the Army family in preparation for destabilizing events such as large-scale combat operations? And when you think about that, just a question associated with that would be, are there key components and existing structures that can be repurposed to achieve the desired effect? And that effect is the Army family, its many communities being fully prepared for the rigor and uncertainty of large-scale combat operations. Thanks.
So I'll go ahead and start off. And the reason I like to start off because what's very important about our communities is our Army Community Service on our installation. Those are key components that have multiple opportunities and resources and support services for families. And they're the one-stop shop that allows family members to go there initially and as they arrive to an installation to be able to have that resource. And there's multiple resources that are there in the Army Community Services, from military spouse employment to connections to child care facilities, to quality of life functions, quality of life examples going on the installations. So those are very, very key components, and it's a center location to allow the entire community to be able to come together. Also, it's a good source to allow what partnerships are outside the communities to allow an easier transition into the installation.
I think the key to it is starting with acknowledgement. That's always a resource. It's not a program, but it's a state of mind. It's an approach that people take to work on another. So the acknowledgement of the military family as an entity itself, but also the significant importance it has to the warrior, to the soldier, to the members of any other service as well. And this idea of acknowledgement can then lead institutional leaders to organize in a way that there's a spirit of acknowledgement and then support structure that comes from that spirit of acknowledgement, that there are unique challenges to them, especially during a time of warfare, large scale or medium or small scale, even just during operational deployments. So how we create those programs and point families to them through communication by acknowledging that you may have support that you need, and we want you to have that support. We acknowledge that you may need it, and it's here for you because you are part of the warrior. It's not separate from the warrior. It's integral to the warrior. And as we talk about things in terms of readiness, we should never lose sight of how critically important that is. I mean, the topic of today's discussion certainly alludes to that. But the warrior is connected to a family. Sometimes the best family they've ever experienced is their military family. They came from a destroyed situation growing up. We did a casual survey when I was a division commander to try to get a grip on what was happening between deployment cycles, because that's where the dangers and the damages were occurring to our warriors and to their families who were losing readiness because a variety of issues were emerging. And that examination revealed, we asked a very simple question in their own definition: did they come from a broken home? I'm summarizing the question, but did they come from a broken home background? More than 60%. So the family unit might be their military unit, might be the best family they're part of. We have to acknowledge that as well. That what people are experiencing when they're in contact with other human beings is a familial, a family spirit. Some of that is an intact organic family, related by marriage and blood. Some of that is your military family, and both of them have to be kept healthy for the warrior to be effective.
So the way that I'm going to answer this question may sound like a little bit of a contradiction, but it's actually not, because I think that this is what we all want to aim for. Is can I just ask for you to raise your hand if you were in or serving in the military 2011 or prior? How many of you experienced the military life? Okay. I call 2011 the great culture shift that happened in our community. It shifted, and there's a lot of variables of why it shifted. But it's a lot of everything from social media and going from an in-person community to an online community. It's the defense budget. It's fighting two global wars at the same time. It's what we were asking of our families at the same time. It's also just the compounding stress that happened over time. But I call it the great culture shift because we came in around 2008 and we experienced at Fort Carson, Colorado, exactly what he described as what all of us who experienced military life prior to 2011, that's what we go back to when we think about a resilient community. And I hear this from people all the time, from leaders all the time, can we just get back to what we had before? Like, what happened? Why are we doing something different? And so part of that is understanding that if you served during those years, you have a completely different story than those that are coming in now. Just like if you have retired out of the military, what is going on inside the military now is very different from what happened 3, 4, 5 years ago. Even though we all are the same tribe and love what we do and want to deeply protect the tribe that we serve alongside. So part of it is understanding the generational shifts have changed. When you now have millennial, but especially Gen Z spouses that say, I don't really want to be a military spouse. Like, you go do your job, and I'm going to go do my job, and even if that means we have to geo-batch and live apart, then that's what we'll do. But I don't want to identify myself as part of this community. Well, as a Gen X military spouse that experienced that world prior to 2011, of course, that's almost offensive. Like, that was how I survived. That is how we raised our children, was our neighbors. It was people that showed up to be your family when you weren't close to your family, right? And so part of this is understanding from your perspective as a leader, understanding your own story, and understanding those in front of you have a different story. Millennials tell me all the time that the military that they came in is not the same military that I experienced. What they came into during budget cuts and sequestration and all of the compounding stress that we went through prior to that was starting to kind of bleed out. And what they experienced was a military community that was quite angsty, quite frustrated, using words like betrayal, when service members were getting pink slips on deployment, when people who were working on our airframes didn't have the parts that they needed. Right, so they came in and experienced something completely different. And Gen Z, something even more challenging or different. So if we want to bring it back to, and I agree on all of these things, that we want to bring it back, what does it mean? We have to ask a deeper question. How do we bring communities back together again? How do we bring humanity back together again? What does it mean to serve each other again? Because chances are, including me, I'm taking notes today on all the amazing information that's coming out today, and I'm taking notes too. But what does it mean for me to practically go home and be a different human because of what I heard today? Like, I can take notes all day long, but if I don't go home and I don't check on my neighbor, if I don't call on that spouse who is about to have a baby but doesn't have any support, I'll never forget when I was writing the book and doing research, I saw a Facebook comment that was a spouse having a baby in the hospital. She was already had the baby in the hospital, and her post on Facebook was, does anybody have a car that could go and pick up my husband and bring him to the hospital? So it's also about who do you serve? Because your story may be very different from someone across the installation story. And are we engaging in dialogue across the table? Are we creating opportunities to meet at the table and hear someone else's story? So that we hear someone else's need, so that then we can point them to those resources. We all know that the resources work. I hear young millennials now, they're like, oh my gosh, there's an ACS. Do you know what they do? I just took a parenting class. My favorite is when a spouse comes up to me and says, you know what I think we need to do? I think we need to create binders to hold all of our important documents. And I just think there's a way to consolidate the information so that we're more organized. And I think I'm gonna get some spouses together and we're gonna make our binders together. And I'm going, in the back of my head, I'm like, yep, did that in 2007. But it's a new idea now because people are so desperate to be across the table from each other. So I would just say, as far as the installation perspective, when you're thinking about refitting buildings, when you're thinking about reorganizing and being creative with how you're going to bring people together, and yes, point to resources. And when you point to those resources, please don't say, have you tried ACS and have you tried Military One Source? Because I'm not gonna put anybody on the spot, but I could probably ask somebody, tell me about Military One Source, and you would probably fumble. Because we've heard for decades, call Military One Source, but very few of us know actually what they provide. It's different to go to somebody and say, hey, I see you're struggling. Did you know that you can go to Military One Source? And somebody will work with you and they're a licensed professional counselor and they're not gonna take any notes and it's completely under the radar. And it can be telehealth too. Like that's the way, as human beings, we say, I'm here, I see you, I know resources, but I also am a resource. I am a resource. But we've got to decide to be resources again. Your turn.
Well, it's a tough act to follow every time.
Yeah, I know, right?
Do you want to go to the next question, or do you want
Yeah,
me to
I'll go
jump
to
in?
the next question.
Okay.
And I think it's,
Your first dibs.
it really plays off of one of the questions that you mentioned a minute ago, and that is, when you consider, in your own perspective, what is the Army's most effective means of community building, and how well are these integrated across disciplines and domains throughout its communities? And in short, what's the most effective way that we in the Army can really develop these communities?
I think this generational divide is a really critical piece to double click on for a minute here. I think we have to understand that when we're talking about a community, what we have to understand is that no individual person is just part of one community, right? That actually every individual person is pulled in 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 different directions where they feel a sense of obligation, maybe a sense of accountability to these other communities. Now, hopefully, if you're designing it well, this installation, that those communities, largely their attention is in that community, right? And that each of those little sub-communities that they're a part of, it's a softball league, it's a bridge club, a poker, whatever it is, that they understand that each of those sub-communities are part of a something bigger than themselves, right? Each of those sub-communities actually feeds into this broader mission that we all share, right? Where we believe something similar, where our mission is in the same direction. What we have to understand, I think, is that the youngest generations, right? You look in your pocket right now, you've got a device that is pulling you, not to 10 communities that complement each other, but 10 communities that are pulling you in different directions. It's like being psychologically, spiritually drawn and quartered every time you open your phone. Why? I'm going to give you an example. What does Uber want you to do? What does Uber want you to do? Use Uber. What does that mean? Take a ride. Get out of the house. What does TikTok want you to do? Stay in the house, right? That's a very simple, trite example. But every single platform that you are connected to, you are subscribed to, that you get notifications from, right? When we talk about FOMO, fear of missing out, that is a very serious psychological condition. It means you cannot be present in this moment. You cannot be beholden to the people that you are sitting across from. That is that's crisis. that we are in. So the first thing we have to invite folks to understand in these settings is the community leaders and the community members to understand there's no such thing as a community. That folks experience a sense of belonging and beholdenness and accountability to many different communities. I think our job as community leaders and conveners is to invite people to have such a deep and abiding sense of belonging in the broader sense of community that they start to question, yeah, I know I keep getting the notifications from TikTok that's pulling my attention and telling me to go that way, and say, actually, no, this is where I need to be. The generation that is adopting dumb phones, meaning phones that don't have access to the internet at the fastest clip, is not who you think it is. It's Gen Z. 75% of Gen Z, when polled, one of our surveys, indicated that they want to quit social media and that they want to get rid of their smartphone. That's a remarkable shift from where we were 10 years ago. That's, again, pointing to this moment of opportunity. I think one other note that I'll share, and this might be totally heretical, and maybe I'm going to get kicked off the stage, but I think this notion of spiritual readiness, right, which is so hard to measure, of course, right? We're still trying to figure out what are the right metrics for spiritual readiness and spiritual fitness. We talk about it like it's sense of connection that gives you meaning and purpose is critically important. In some ways, I think about spiritual readiness as the connective tissue between all of the domains, right? The word religion comes from religare, L-I-G at its core, which means that we use for ligaments, right? So you think about, I don't know if you were a fan of baseball in the late 90s, but there was something going on in baseball in the late 90s that caused Brady Anderson to hit 58 home runs when he was like 150 pounds soaking wet the year before. I don't know what was going on. I'm not going to point fingers. I know this is on record. I would never accuse, especially a Baltimore Oriole, local stuff. It's fine, right? But something happened that they were building up these muscles, this one domain of how big are your muscles? How strong are you? And then guess what happened to all of these folks? They tore their ligaments. Because if you are investing all of your energy in just one of those domains, or two, or even three or four, but they're not connected to one another, that's where we start to see the tears in our social fabric. That's where we start to see the tears in the psychological fabric that holds us as individuals, us as families, and us as communities together. I think that's where, when we talk about spiritual readiness, is what are the practices that make your ligaments a little more supple, a little stronger, a little more pliable, to withstand the kind of stress that folks are under in this moment.
I think I just want to really quickly give a quick list of practical things, because I know there's some people in the room that would love just like practically what could some of this look like in our installations. Number one, I'm just going to really quickly repeat that know your resources and know how to communicate them in a different way. I think this is also about, you talk about the spiritual component. I was thinking about large scale, and resilience, and what are we actually asking, and what are we actually proactively trying to prepare our force and our families to do. And when you study the Ukraine people, 71% of them currently have hope. The more I research what makes that community resilient in the face of large-scale combat, it comes down to hope. And more specifically, I loved this, I'm going to read it because I think it's really important, that even though they value vertical leadership, they trust more than anything the ability to organize horizontally to survive and unify. That the horizontal relationships are not only more valuable, but they trust it more. Their ability to unify, which comes back to what everybody's saying as far as the sense of commonality. But if you unify, but you have nothing to hope in, which I think is part of the spiritual conversation here, if you don't have hope, it gets to a deeper level of that question of what's your why? We've said that several times today. What's your why? I'm going to challenge you to go deeper than that. If we're going to talk about building resilience, why do I have a career? Well, there's lots of reasons why. But why do I persevere? That is a different question. And if I don't know what I'm hoping in, so we have to start answering that question. And as leaders, the practical application of that is if you don't know what you're hoping in your role, and how to vision cast that. The next generation, and I'll just be honest, my generation needs to know what we're hoping in. Because those that went through 2 decades of global conflict thought they were hoping for a peacetime and didn't get it. We just changed the topic. And so our community is losing hope. And our community is losing hope internally too. And that means it takes leaders like you, whatever your circle of influence is, can you vision cast hope? It doesn't have to be hope and victory. It can be like I think what we're hearing from the Ukraine people, which is hope in who we can be to each other. And how do you practically apply that and model that in your leadership? By doing things with other people, by making it possible to be across the table from someone. Provide programming. Those of you who are chaplains, I know it's a struggle sometimes to get an event across the finish line and fund it. But if you curate the research that you heard today and give that to your JAG and communicate the why, and that this is not just about having a marriage retreat. This is not just about teaching a resiliency skill. This is not just about an LPD. This is the curated data of why the spiritual component and whatever it is that we're going to be addressing at this retreat or this workshop or this day or whatever is going to contribute to hope and boosting morale. And this is why we need to do that for the sake of readiness. But you have to be able to articulate that to get it across the line, to get it funded. And then when you are there, can you vision cast that for people? Vision cast hope of where we're headed and why this tribe still matters. Last thing I'll say is teach the younger generation what some of you in the room that raised your hand experienced. They just don't have the memory that you have. You have wisdom to say, this is what it's like to serve your neighbor. And I'm gonna do it this Saturday. Or we are gonna do it this Saturday. And just teach with the wisdom that you know, rather than expecting them to just figure it out by themselves in their own time. I'm gonna say one last harsh thing, because I guess I'm feeling it today. I don't know what's going on. But this is coming from me traveling around and hearing from leaders. This is me curating what I'm hearing. The theme is we're getting lazy. That's the theme. We are getting lazy, all of us. The more we're on smartphones, the more we're oversaturated with information, we're getting lazy and we're showing up to work, even as leaders, and we're saying, can you just do your job? Because I'm just here to do my job, and if you could just do your job, then this would be so much easier. But when you don't do your job, I just get really annoyed, and I don't want to lead you, and I don't want to fix anything, and you're making my life hard. Leadership and resilience and making changes means we have to work harder. There's no way around it.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. I tell you what, so
I might get
rich.
kicked off the stage.
Yeah, so rich. I'm telling you, it's rich inputs, and I tell you, I think we can all walk away with that. General Brooks, if you could kind of just talk about the role spiritual fitness had as a leader, as a person, some of the things that you were able to utilize in order to, one, even maintain synergy in your own family, but then also within the community to which you held dear as a commander.
Sure. I mean, there's been so many great points made, so I just want to thank my colleagues on the panel for all of your interventions and thoughts that you've introduced. Certainly as we think about different dimensions, and there are different models out there, the current model includes spiritual fitness, and I'm glad that it does. To me, it's central. We may reflect it peripheral. It's around the edge of the other 4 items. But in my personal way of thinking, it's central. It's the only thing that cannot be taken away. Your rank can be taken away, your position can be taken away, your physical condition can be taken away. All it takes is a bad break. When you decided to go on leave and went skiing and you came back and suddenly now you can't do what you were supposed to do, or it gets infected and then you can't even recover from it, and then you're med boarded, and then that what you had signed up to do is gone. It can be taken away. All these other things can be taken away. You can lose your family, but do you lose your spirit? I'm of the persuasion that it's immortal, and you can give it away, but it can't be taken away. And so to me, it's the central point, it's the axle around which all other things revolve, and must be the last thing that exists when it's all said and done. For me personally, you know, I've had plenty of opportunities to put that to test. You know, where some circumstance happened that either I felt beyond my control and maybe I started losing hope, or lost my connections to others, and found that the way to get it back was through a spiritual journey first. I needed more spiritual fitness and had to do some working out. So you have to work out spiritually. You have to go deeply into yourself through introspection, through reflection, and understand what your purpose is. Why were you doing what you're doing in the first place? What role did you play in what just happened? Is there anything left that you can connect to? What grief did you cause to others that you need to repair? Because these things are moral injuries, and the moral injuries eventually begin to contract your spirit. And so I'm of the view that that has to come first. It's also the hardest one to train and the hardest one to condition. And I'm so thankful for clinicians and for chaplains, and chaplains assistants, sorry, this is using an old term, religious affairs specialists, who are part of that, who are part of that structure of helping people to even realize that's a part of who they are. So we don't want to lose that. Now, I'd like to see it central, but I understand that it's difficult to do that without being considered as proselytizing. And sometimes that can work administratively against you, even if it's the right thing to do. And certainly I've got experiences with that in my own journey that resulted in taking a couple steps sideways or backwards. And that's okay. It all worked out the way it was supposed to. So your spirit is what helps to give you hope. Your spirit is what you connect to keep coming back and realize there's still something worth living for. And that you can help communicate that to someone else, just help them find it. That's been my experience with it. And very important to my family as well as to me, and I'm grateful that I was raised in a family that recognized the spiritual component of every human being from the beginning. So that wasn't new to me when I came to the Army. But for some it is. It's the first time anyone has exposed them to that. And it's okay for leaders to help them see that in themselves, especially through their example.
Thank you, sir. Rabbi Murillo, this is a question from the group. It says, how do we build community and enable quality of life for the reserve components who are distributed, disconnected, and largely unsupported by Army installations due to geography and limited entitlements?
So that's a great question. Thank you very much. So when you look at the quality of life, right? Your quality of life, and it's a catchphrase, kind of similar to your point of resilience, right? It's taboo, all right? But you look at quality of life, and what does that really mean? Because I will tell you that your quality of life is different than my quality of life. I'm okay with sleeping on the floor, but you got to have a sleep number, right? So your quality of life, some people do, I don't know. But your quality of life is completely different. So how that relates to an individual person, a team, an installation, a community is completely different. But what we do is we try to ensure that we have resources available for those, all right, to ensure that their quality of life is at least to a minimum standard of, hey, look, is it okay if you sleep on a sleeping pad versus a sleep number, you know? You have to understand that, geographically dispersed organizations try to have communities built within their own installations, within their own footprint. And that's where the peer-to-peer connection is truly, truly important, is being able to have that peer-to-peer connection, as you stated, ma'am, the horizontal connection to your teammates, right, and family members, and then have resources available for family members to be able to rely on each other. All right, if you've ever been to any remote installation, remote and isolated installation, or far away, and name your few out there, they heavily rely on their individual connections to their peers across the board. And that's truly, how you build the resiliency within that individual or within that community. It's because when it's smaller, it allows you to build that. It allows you. Now, granted, you're away from the rest of the world in some cases, but those communities are some of the tightest communities that I've ever been a part of. And some of you have too. You've been to these locations, you've been to these places, and when you look at how you are building resiliency and those quality of life with those remote and isolated, those geographically dispersed, I mean, it's within the peer-to-peer communication and peer-to-peer communities in itself.
Outstanding. And Corie, if you could take an opportunity to answer this question. Many soldiers also dislike the word resiliency. This is for various reasons, obviously. And would you please explain what the negative energy surrounding the word is from a military spouse perspective?
Yeah, I think, and I'm going to do my best to not like too many negative, right? I'm trying to speak truth, but also hopefully truth that encourages you to grow, right? When we talk about taking care of families and taking care of the community, and I repeated Odierno's quote throughout the book, because we all know that quote and we feel that it's true. And there's something in us that knows that it's true. And families deeply know that it's true. But over the years, as the installation, when the community came back and asked for what they needed in order to meet the demand of what was being asked of them, although there was plenty of resources and plenty of help that was coming out, it's kind of like that Lucille Ball, you know, which I know ages me too, but like the factory where the chocolate's coming down the, you know, and then everything gets out of control because the chocolate's moving faster than they can pick it up and wrap it, right? And that's pretty much what happened to our Army community family over the last 2 decades. So yes, the institution was trying to give support and meet the demand, but the families kept asking for more because the demand was just getting higher and higher. And so what the community heard year after year after year was, can you just bounce back? Like, that's really all we need you to do, is just bounce back, right? And so after a while, it became kind of a half attempt, but maybe I'm not saying that this was the intention, I'm just saying this is how it's received, that it came across as, can you stop complaining and can you just, you know, get yourself together so that you can be the support for our service members? And so when they hear that word resilient, it is actually emotionally invalidating. So when we say, we're gonna make you more resilient, what they hear is, we're not gonna listen to you, we're not going to hear your story, we just need you to get well so that you can provide the support. Now on a tactical level, we need that to happen, that's true. So I would encourage you to use some of these other words when you're out and about with families, especially those that are over 40, because a lot of our leadership are over 40.
Easy.
And I say that to those that are still in right now that remember life before 2011, that really have a reaction to that word. Use words like grit, use words like spiritual fitness, use words like wellness. That really translates well with the younger generation. Use words like even thrive, it's not one of my favorite ones because it gets used a lot, but that's a little bit better. Just know it's okay for us to use it in doctrine and use it, you know, and what we need to use it for. But when you're talking to a family member and you say, I'm just about your resilience, what they actually hear is, you just want me to get better so that your job is easier. I hate saying it that way. Even though they also deeply want to be resilient. So maybe the deeper issue here is not so much the interaction. This is the clinical side of me coming out, right? Maybe it's not so much about the word use, and maybe it's really about the relationship underneath, right? Isn't that what happens in a marriage when you have a disagreement about a word? Semantics, it's really about the deeper issue of, do you care about me? And if you can answer that question, which is also what Gen Z is asking for, do you care about me? Then they'll be resilient all day long because now they have hope. Hope that they're not going to be alone. When you heard the panel earlier about suicide prevention, it came down to, I thought a lot about it coming here, like, what is the breaking point of a culture? What is the limits of resilience? What's the limits of an individual? It comes down to being alone. If you're alone, you don't have hope. If you are with someone else, you have now at least something to hope in, or someone who can cast hope for you. So.
Awesome. And as a command sergeant major, and unfortunately I have to bring this to a close. But I will tell you, so I get a chance to take all of your comments and take it back to my battalion here in Germany on tomorrow. And the true culmination of your comments have been about building relationship, building places and spaces where campfire principles actually matter, right? Where we can talk about some of the things that are problematic and some of the things that have become taboo over the courses of the years, but then also acknowledgement of the military family and how important the military family is a part of our organizations, as well as a part of our Army, and how important that is. And then the availability of resources. If we don't communicate where those resources are, guess what? There'll be great resources unused, and all the money that will be left on the table afterwards. And so it'll be very important to communicate that. But I will just thank you, the panel, and all of those that were listening in today. AUSA, thank you so much for the opportunity to discuss this so interesting topic. Thank you.
Wow. Wow, this has been great. You know, normally after lunch people like leave. You guys are still here. Must have been this great panel this time. Let's give them another round of applause. Let's take their seats. You can take your seats. So we'll